They looked at his hoodie. They looked at his skin. They looked at his silence. And they decided in the space of a single glance that he was nobody. They were wrong. And before that night was over, every single one of them would understand exactly how wrong. When the crew of Meridian Airways Flight 217 put their hands on Marcus Kane and tore him out of his own seat, they thought they were removing an inconvenience, a problem, something unpleasant blocking the view of a man who mattered. They had no idea that the man they left bleeding on the carpet was the only reason their airline still had a pulse. This is the story of the flight that cost one arrogant executive everything he had, and cost an entire airline its illusion of untouchability. Stay with me, because the way this ends, the way karma finally closes its hand around every single person in this cabin, is something you are not going to want to miss. The cabin of the Meridian 787 smelled like money, warm leather, cold champagne, the faint hush of recycled air that had been filtered through first class before anyone else got to breathe it. Marcus Kane didn't care about any of that. He just wanted to sleep. He sank deeper into seat 2A, pulled the hood of his charcoal gray sweatshirt up over his head, and let his eyes fall shut. 41 hours. That's how long he'd been awake, bouncing between Singapore, Chicago, and now this red eye out of JFK, bound for Los Angeles. 41 hours of negotiations, spreadsheets, and men in $1,000 suits trying to read his face for a tell he never gave them. He didn't look like a man worth 9 figures. He looked like a guy who'd fallen asleep on the wrong train and woken up in first class by accident. Faded sweatpants, scuffed sneakers, a phone with a cracked corner sitting in the front pocket of his hoodie. On that phone was a signature waiting to be typed, a $410 million rescue package for a company that didn't know yet it was about to be saved. Or by whom? Had. Marcus was the founder and managing partner of Ashford Capital Partners, one of the most feared private equity firms on the East Coast. He didn't do interviews. He didn't do galas. He did deals, quietly, ruthlessly, and then he went home and told almost nobody. Right now, none of that mattered. Right now, he just wanted the world to leave him alone for 6 hours. The world had other plans. "Excuse me." The voice landed like a slap, nasal, clipped, dripping with a kind of entitlement that only comes from never once in your life being told no. Marcus didn't open his eyes. I said, "Excuse me, you're in my seat." He slid one earbud out, opened his eyes slowly. Standing in the aisle, chest puffed out like a rooster, who'd just discovered a mirror, was a man in a slate blue bespoke suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His hair was combed back with surgical precision. A gold watch caught the cabin light every time he moved his wrist, which was often because he wanted you to see it. This was Preston Kessler, Executive Vice President of Kessler Dynamics, a man who had been handed every door in his life pre-opened and had convinced himself he'd kicked each one down. Behind him stood a woman, clutching a leather tote, eyes darting nervously between her boss and the growing crowd of passengers craning their necks to watch. "I think you're mistaken," Marcus said. His voice was calm, low, the kind of calm that comes from 20 years of learning to sit on a fire instead of letting it burn a room down. "This is 2A. My boarding pass says 2A. Preston let out a short, ugly laugh and turned to the woman behind him. "Renee, can you believe this? The help is confused." He turned back, leaning down, close enough that Marcus could smell the gin already on his breath. "Listen, buddy, I don't know if you snuck up here, or if some system glitch upgraded your economy ticket by mistake, but this is the seat I requested. Personally, I am a Meridian Chairman's Circle member. I need this seat for privacy. I have work to do that is worth more than you'll make in your entire life. So why don't you grab your little backpack and go find your row? I hear economy's lovely this time of year." The cabin had gone dead quiet. Even the soft jazz piped through the speakers seemed to hold its breath. A few passengers lowered their phones, sensing blood in the water. Marcus felt the old, familiar heat rise behind his ribs, the one he'd spent 2 decades training himself to bury in boardrooms, full of men who looked exactly like Preston Kessler. "I paid for this seat," he said, voice dropping an octave. "Full fare. I'm not moving." Preston's face flushed a mottled, furious red. He wasn't used to the word no. He snapped his fingers over his shoulder, sharp and loud, toward the galley. "Chief flight attendant." Now, a woman in a crisp navy and gold, meridian uniform hurried over, her smile stretched thin and professional. Her name tag read Diane. "Is there a problem, Mr. Kessler?" she asked, her tone syrupy sweet. The sweetness of someone who already knew this man's name, his tipping habits, and the 3 colleagues he'd gotten fired last year for daring to disagree with him. "There is a massive problem, Diane." Preston jabbed a finger toward Marcus. "This individual is refusing to vacate my seat. I have a meeting tomorrow that will reshape an entire industry, and I cannot conduct sensitive business sitting next to." He paused, letting his eyes drag slowly over Marcus's hoodie, his sneakers, his silence. "This." Diane turned to Marcus, and something in her face shifted, hardened. The way a teacher's face hardens right before she scolds a child she's already decided is guilty. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Marcus reached into his pocket without a word and handed it over. Diane studied it, turned it over, held it up as if the paper itself might be lying to her. "The ticket is valid," she admitted, and she sounded almost disappointed. "Good," Marcus said, reaching for his headphones. "Then we're done here, however," Preston interjected, stepping closer, looming. "Meridian has a policy about passenger comfort and suitability." "I am feeling threatened, Diane. Look at him. He's staring at me with hostility." Marcus hadn't moved a single muscle. He was sitting perfectly, deliberately still, a survival habit learned on the south side of Chicago long before he ever set foot in a Manhattan boardroom. You keep your hands visible, you keep your voice down, you give them nothing to point to. Diane looked at Preston, then at Marcus. She saw the hoodie, she saw the color of his skin, she saw a man who wasn't groveling, wasn't apologizing, wasn't shrinking, and something ugly and automatic clicked into place behind her eyes. "Sir," she said to Marcus, her voice sliding from syrup to ice in a single breath, "I'm going to need you to gather your belongings. We have a seat available further back. It has extra legroom. It's a generous accommodation." "You're asking me to give up a $14,000 seat," Marcus said slowly, "because he wants it. We're asking you to help us de-escalate a situation you're creating." "I'm creating?" A short, humorless laugh escaped him. "I haven't moved an inch." Preston leaned down, close to Marcus's ear, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "If you don't get up on your own, Diane's going to call security. And we both know how that tends to go for people who look like you. Don't we, boy?" The word hit the air and just hung there. Heavy. Toxic. A few nearby passengers actually flinched. Marcus turned his head and looked Preston dead in the eye. No anger on his face, nothing you could point a camera at and call aggressive, just a stillness that was somehow more unsettling than any shout could have been. "You have no idea who you're talking to," he said quietly. "I'd sit down and be quiet if I were you." "Did you hear that?" Preston straightened up, playing to the crowd now, voice pitched for an audience. "He just threatened me. Diane, he threatened me. Get him off this plane." Now, the temperature in the cabin dropped from awkward to dangerous. Diane tapped her earpiece, her voice tight. "Captain, we have a level 2 disturbance in the forward cabin. A passenger is refusing crew instruction and behaving in a hostile manner toward a priority guest. Requesting security to the gate immediately." "You're making a mistake," Marcus said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand. His hands stayed flat and visible on the armrests. "I'm going to give you one chance. Check the manifest. Check the name. Marcus Kane." "I don't care if your name is written in gold," Preston sneered, straightening his tie with a theatrical little tug. "You're getting off this plane." From several rows back, A young woman rose to her feet, messy bun, oversized camera bag slung across her chest, phone already up and recording, hand trembling just slightly. "Hey," her voice cracked but carried. "He didn't do anything. I've been filming this whole time. He started it." She nodded toward Preston. This was Maya Reyes, a travel content creator who had saved airline miles for 2 years just to film a first-class review on this exact route. Diane whipped around, eyes flashing. "Put that camera away, miss, or you'll be escorted off this aircraft as well. This is now a federal security matter." Maya's hands shook, but she didn't lower the phone. She tilted the angle down, tucking it half behind her carry-on, the red recording light still blinking steadily. "Nobody's going to care what some blogger posts, sweetheart." Preston laughed, waving her off. "This is the real world. Money talks." 2 large men in dark, tactical polos boarded the aircraft. Not police, private contract security, the kind hired to look intimidating and follow orders without asking questions. The lead officer had a buzzed haircut and a name tag that read Grant. He marched straight up to row 2 without so much as glancing at Marcus's face. "Sir, you need to stand up now." "I have a valid contract with this airline," Marcus said, his voice flattening into something like steel. "A ticket is a legal agreement." "The only agreement I care about," Grant said, "is the one that lets me drag you out of that seat if you don't walk." He reached out and grabbed Marcus's forearm. "Don't touch me," Marcus said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command, low, final, absolute. Grant yanked anyway. Marcus was 6'3" and solid from a decade of stress relieved in a gym, and the seatbelt was still latched, so he didn't move as easily as Grant expected. "He's resisting," Grant barked, escalating instantly, like he'd been waiting for exactly this excuse his entire career. "Get his legs." The second officer lunged forward. "Stop, this is insane," Maya screamed from the back. "He's not resisting, he's buckled in." "Stop. Everyone stay in your seats." Diane shrieked at the surrounding passengers, several of whom had now stood up, phones raised, faces pale with the particular horror of watching something you know is wrong and not knowing if you're brave enough to do anything about it. Preston stood in the aisle, sipping a fresh glass of champagne some terrified junior attendant had pressed into his hand, watching the whole scene with an expression of pure, twisted delight. "That's it," he muttered almost to himself. "Take out the trash." Marcus unbuckled his own seatbelt. "I'll walk," he said. Low and even, realizing that fighting back physically would only end with him in handcuffs or worse, and he had a deal to close. "I said I'll walk." "Too late for that," Grant snarled, adrenaline and bias fusing into something ugly and unstoppable now. He hooked an arm around Marcus's neck. The second guard grabbed his ankles. They hauled him out of the seat and slammed him down into the aisle. His skull cracked against the hard edge of the seat frame. In row 1, white light exploded behind his eyes. He tasted copper, blood, from where his own teeth had caught his lip on impact. "Stop! You're hurting him." Maya was crying openly now, camera still rolling, capturing every single second. They dragged him. They actually dragged him down the narrow aisle of first class, past rows of stunned, silent millionaires who had paid a fortune to look away from exactly this kind of thing. His hoodie bunched up around his throat. His sneakers squealed against the carpet, leaving twin black streaks. As they hauled him past row 1, he locked eyes with Preston Kessler. Preston raised his champagne glass in a mocking little toast. "Safe travels, buddy. Enjoy the bus." Marcus stopped fighting. He went completely limp, but his eyes never left Preston's face. He was memorizing it. Memorizing Diane's badge number. Memorizing Grant's name tag. Memorizing the flight number stenciled on the bulkhead. Meridian Flight 27 scene. Departure Gate 14. He filed every detail away with the cold precision of a man who built his entire fortune on remembering things other people assumed he'd forget. They dragged him down the jet bridge and dropped him onto the cold concrete of the terminal floor. like a bag of luggage that had failed inspection. "Don't come back," Grant said, breathing hard, deadening over him. "You're on the no-fly list, effective right now." The cabin door slammed shut behind them. The lock clicked. Marcus lay there a moment, staring up at the buzzing fluorescent lights, blood trickling warm down his chin. His ribs screamed where he'd hit the seat frame. His head throbbed like a second heartbeat. Slowly, he sat up, wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand. He reached into his pocket. His phone was still there, screen spiderwebbed with cracks but alive. He didn't call the police. Not yet. He dialed a number that maybe 11 people in the entire world possessed. "This is Marcus Kane," he said, and his voice was calm, terrifyingly, unnaturally calm. "Get me the chairman of Meridian Airways. Wake him up if you have to. Tell legal to meet me on the tarmac. I am not going anywhere." Back on board, Preston Kessler settled into 2A like a king reclaiming his throne. He stretched his legs out with a long, satisfied sigh. Finally, he said to Renee, who sat rigid across the aisle, refusing to meet his eyes, "Some peace and quiet. You did great work back there, Diane. I'll make sure corporate hears your name." Diane beamed, relief flooding her face. "Thank you, Mr. Kessler. Fresh champagne? Bring the bottle. I'm celebrating." He grinned, loosening his tie. "Tomorrow I close the biggest deal of my career." He had no idea. No idea at all that the man he'd just had dragged off the plane like garbage was the exact man he was flying across the country to beg for a rescue route. And he had no idea the aircraft hadn't even left the gate yet. His career, though he didn't know it, was already finished. In the sterile, fluorescent glow of the terminal holding area, a paramedic dabbed antiseptic across Marcus's split lip. The sting barely registered against the cold, methodical fury settling into his gut like concrete. "You might need stitches, sir," she said softly. She'd already seen the clip. Maya's footage had hit social media 11 minutes after it happened and was already climbing past 100,000 views. Meridian Dragged was trending. Later, Marcus said, gently pushing her hand aside, "I have a call to finish." On the other end of the line, Walter Higgins, chairman of Meridian Airways, was standing at a charity gala in the Hamptons with a martini in hand, blissfully unaware his entire empire was on fire. "Marcus, I can barely hear you. Is this about the merger paperwork? I thought we were signing in LA. There won't be a signing, Walter." Marcus's voice was so quiet, the two guards standing nearby had to lean in to catch it. "Not unless you do exactly what I tell you in the next breath." What are you talking about? You sound different." "I'm sitting on the floor of a terminal holding area right now. I was just assaulted, dragged down the aisle of your flagship flight, and thrown onto the concrete. Because your chairman's circle passenger didn't like the way I looked in a hoodie." Dead silence. Then the distant sound of glass shattering on Walter's end. They did what? They dragged me, Walter." "Me. The man holding the $410 million credit line, keeping your airline from filing for bankruptcy by spring." Marcus checked his watch. "That plane is currently taxiing. If it leaves this gate, I call my bank in the morning and pull every dollar. Meridian Airways ceases to exist by the time markets open, Monday." No, please, Marcus, listen. "I'll fire them. I'll fire everyone involved. Just don't pull the funding." "I don't want you to fire anyone," Marcus said, rising slowly to his feet. The security guards nearby stepped back instinctively. "I want to fire them myself. Turn that plane around, Walter. Bring it back to the gate. I want a station manager down here with a clean suit, a lawyer, and real police. Port Authority, not the private contractors who just put their hands on me." "Done. It's done. I'm calling the tower right now, Marcus. I am so sorry." "Save it," Marcus said, and hung up. He looked over at the two security contractors, Grant and his partner, leaning against the wall, chuckling at something on a phone, utterly oblivious that the predator had just become prey. The doors to the holding area burst open. A man in a rumpled suit and a lanyard reading "Station Manager," Hollis ran in, flanked by 4 Port Authority officers with grim expressions. Mr. Kane, Hollis nearly stumbled, staring at the blood on Marcus's lip and the tear in his hoodie. On behalf of Meridian Airways, I am so deeply. Marcus held up a hand. Do you know who I am? Yes, sir. Chairman Higgins called me himself. He was screaming. Good. Marcus turned and pointed a steady finger at Grant. I want that man arrested for assault and battery. I want him out of my sight before I lose what's left of my patience. Grant's smug grin evaporated. Hey, wait a second. I was just doing my job, the captain authorized. You put your hands on a compliant passenger, the Port Authority sergeant said, cuffs already jingling in his grip. We've seen the video. Turn around. As Grant was cuffed and read his rights, Marcus turned back to Hollis. Do you have a suit for me? Yes, sir. It's from the airport boutique, but it's Italian wool. It'll do. Marcus took the garment bag. I'm changing. Then we're getting back on that plane. Sir, the pilot's already been ordered to return to the gate, but maybe you should go to a hospital first? Marcus's eyes had gone flat and cold, like a lake freezing over in real time. No, I have a seat in 2A, and I intend to sit in it. On board Flight 27 champagne was still flowing in first class. Preston had his laptop open, reviewing his pitch deck for tomorrow, holding court like nothing in the world could touch him. You know, Renee, he said loudly, not bothering to lower his voice. It's all about dominance. You show strength immediately in this business. That guy back there. He folded the second real pressure hit him. That's why he's sitting on the tarmac right now, and I'm up here with a glass of Dom Perignon. Renee didn't answer. She was staring at her phone, face going pale, as a breaking news alert lit up her screen. Billionaire investor assaulted on Meriden flight. Stock. Plunge in after-hours trading. Preston, she whispered, hand trembling. I think you need to see this. Not now, Renee. I'm in the zone. That's when the hum of the engines changed pitch. The forward momentum they'd been building toward the runway suddenly stalled. The plane shuddered and began, unmistakably, to turn. A ripple of confusion moved through the cabin. What is happening? Preston snapped upright, spilling champagne across his cuff. Why are we turning? The intercom crackled. Captain Dawson's voice came through, strained and clipped in a way that made every hair on Preston's neck stand up. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've been instructed by air traffic control and corporate headquarters to return to the gate immediately due to an operational matter. Please remain seated with your belts fastened. Unbelievable. Preston threw his hands up. Diane, what is the meaning of this? I have a meeting I cannot be late for. Diane hurried over, flustered, sweat beading on her forehead, despite the cabin air conditioning. I don't know, Mr. Kessler. The cockpit says it's a code from the chairman's office. It's very unusual. The aircraft taxied back to the gate. Passengers murmured, agitated, phones lighting up one after another as the video kept spreading, kept climbing, kept turning a private humiliation into a public reckoning. The plane rolled to a stop. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Usually, when a plane returns to the gate, it's a mechanical issue. Maintenance walks on. Maybe a sick passenger gets escorted off. This time, the jet bridge extended with an ominous, hollow thud. The cabin door opened. Finally, Preston muttered, craning his neck to see. Let's get this fixed so we can actually fly somewhere. It wasn't a mechanic. Station Manager Hollis walked in first, visibly terrified. Behind him came 2 Port Authority officers, and behind them, moving with a calm, predatory grace that filled the entire cabin like an approaching storm front, was a man in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, a small white bandage taped over his split lip. It was Marcus Kane. The cabin fell into a silence so complete, you could hear the ice cubes settling in someone's abandoned glass. Maya, still filming from the back, gasped and zoomed in. Preston's jaw actually dropped. He blinked, certain for a moment he was hallucinating. The disheveled man in the hoodie was gone. In his place stood something else entirely. A man whose suit fit like it had been poured onto him, whose shoulders were back, whose chin was level, who radiated the kind of quiet, absolute power that money can imitate, but never truly buy. Marcus didn't look at any of the passengers. He walked directly to the galley, where Diane and the rest of the crew stood frozen, coffee pot rattling faintly in her shaking grip. "Mr. Kane," Diane stammered. Save it," Marcus said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried through every row of the cabin like a held breath. "I want the manifest." The passenger manifest. "Give it to me." Diane handed over her tablet with trembling fingers. Marcus took it, scrolled once, and turned slowly to face seat 2A. Preston was still sitting there. But he looked smaller now. The arrogance was leaking out of him in real time, replaced by a creeping, cold dread as he registered the exact cut of Marcus's suit, the exact look in his eyes, the look of a man who didn't just play the game, a man who owned the entire stadium. You came back," Preston tried, forcing a laugh that came out thin and broken. "Did you buy an economy ticket and sneak up here again? Because I have to tell you, that seat's still mine." Marcus stepped closer. He didn't raise his voice. He leaned one hand against the overhead bin, looming directly over Preston, close enough that the entire cabin could feel the temperature drop. "Preston Kessler," he read off the tablet, slow and deliberate. "Executive Vice President, Kessler Dynamics." That's right," Preston said, his voice cracking on the second word. "And do you know who I am, besides a nuisance to you?" "I'm the man you're flying across the country to meet tomorrow," Marcus said. The blood drained from Preston's face, so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. "Kessler Dynamics is drowning in debt and looking at insolvency inside 90 days. Marcus continued, reciting it from memory, flat and merciless. "You have a meeting tomorrow morning at the Wilshire Grand with the partners of Ashford Capital to beg for a $410 million rescue." You're Ashford?" Preston's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping on a dock. "I am Marcus Kane, managing partner of Ashford Capital Partners. And as of about 20 minutes ago, I am also the single largest debt holder of this airline." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Somewhere in the back, Maya whispered, "Oh my God," straight into her lens. Marcus leaned in, closer, his voice dropping to something almost gentle, which somehow made it more frightening. "So here's your choice, Preston. Stay in that seat and I cancel tomorrow's meeting. I let Kessler Dynamics collapse. I buy the wreckage for pennies on the dollar, and I personally make sure you never sit in another boardroom for the rest of your life." Sweat had broken out across Preston's entire face now. His gelled hair looked like it was starting to melt. Or, Marcus said, "You get up. You apologize to every single person in this cabin for the delay you caused, and you get off my plane." Preston looked around wildly, at Renee, who stared back at him with pure disgust, at Diane, quietly crying near the galley, at rows of strangers watching him with a mixture of horror and grim satisfaction. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I just did," Marcus said. He glanced at his watch, unhurried. "You have until I finish this sentence to decide." Preston shot to his feet so fast, he knocked his champagne glass clean off the tray table. I'm moving. Renee grabbed the bags. "No," Marcus said sharply. "Renee stays. She never said a word against me." "You leave," Renee looked at Preston. Then at Marcus. Then, without hesitation, sat back down and clicked her belt closed. "I think I'll stay, actually," she said quietly. "I have a meeting to get to." The humiliation was total and absolute. Red-faced, trembling, Preston shoved past Marcus and made the long, silent walk down the aisle, past the glaring passengers, past Maya's unblinking lens, off the plane and out of first class forever. Marcus watched him go without a flicker of satisfaction. Then he turned to Diane. "Change the linens on this seat," he said. "There's a stain on the carpet." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." He turned to the rest of the cabin, adjusting his jacket. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. The problem has been removed. Drinks are on me for the remainder of the flight. He sat down in 2A, the seat he'd paid for, the seat he'd bled for, but the flight wasn't over. Not even close. 3 hours over the Rockies, the cabin lights dimmed to their soft blue night setting. To any outside observer, it would have looked like a peaceful red-eye. To the crew, it felt like standing on a bridge that hadn't finished collapsing yet. Diane stood in the galley, knuckles white against the counter, staring at the curtain that separated her from row 2. On the other side of that thin fabric sat the man she had sneered at, the man she had ordered dragged off the plane, the man who she now understood with a wave of nausea effectively controlled her paycheck, her mortgage, and every future she'd ever hoped to build. He asked for water, whispered Emily, a junior attendant who'd been in the back galley during the incident and looked too frightened to go anywhere near row 1. "I'll take it," Diane said, straightening her uniform with shaking hands, forcing a smile onto a face that felt like cracked porcelain. She walked it out herself. Marcus had his laptop open. Not a movie, not sleep. A document. Diane caught a glimpse of the header and felt her stomach drop. It looked exactly like an internal personnel file. "Mr. Kane," she said softly. "Your water, sir. Sparkling with lime." I assumed." Marcus didn't look up. He finished typing a note in the margin of the file. "Set it down." She placed the glass on the tray table, ice clinking loud in the tense silence. "Sir," she started, words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "I wanted to say, earlier, that was a misunderstanding. A terrible one. Mr. Kessler is a chairman's circle member. He was so aggressive, I felt pressured to keep the peace. I didn't know." "You didn't know I was a billionaire," Marcus said quietly, finally lifting his eyes to meet hers. "That's what you mean, isn't it? You saw a black man in a hoodie and decided, instantly, that he didn't belong up here. Tell me, if I'd been white, in a suit, would you have asked to see my boarding pass at all?" Diane opened her mouth. No sound came out. She wanted to lie, but under that gaze, the lie simply died in her throat. "You judged my worth by my appearance," Marcus continued, calm and cutting as a scalpel. "Now I'm judging your worth by your performance. I'm reading your file, Diane. 4 formal complaints in the last 3 years. Every single one involving passengers of color. That's not bad luck. That's a pattern." "Those were exaggerated," she said, tears spilling now. "Please, sir. I have 2 kids in community college. I've given this airline 19 years. Then you had 19 years to learn how to treat people," Marcus said, turning back to his screen. "That will be all." She stood frozen a moment longer, devastated. She'd braced herself for shouting she could have survived. This cold, surgical dismantling of everything she'd built was so much worse. She fled back to the galley and quietly sobbed into a folded napkin. In the cockpit, the mood was no lighter. Captain Dawson stared out into the black, nothing of the night sky, sweat beading despite the climate control, flinching every time the radio crackled, certain each transmission would be corporate, ordering him to divert. "Captain," the co-pilot said, checking a message. "A car's text from operations. Read it. Upon arrival, proceed to remote stand. Do not allow disembarkation until corporate security has boarded. Crew is to remain on aircraft for debrief with legal." Dawson closed his eyes. Debrief with legal. In 22 years of flying, he'd learned exactly what that phrase meant. He thought back to the moment he'd authorized Grant to remove a passenger without even glancing at the cockpit door camera, trusting Diane's word over his own eyes. Laziness. Arrogance. It was going to cost him his wings, and he knew it. Back in the cabin, Marcus felt a light tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Maya standing there, camera lowered but not off, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Mr. Kane," she said. "I'm Maya. I'm the one who filmed it." Something in Marcus's expression eased, just slightly. "I know. You were the only person in this cabin who stood up when everyone else looked at their phones and looked away. Thank you. I have the full footage," she said, every second uncut. I only posted a clip so far. Do you want it? I'll hand it over if you want it gone. Marcus studied her for a long moment. He saw something rare in her face. Actual integrity, not performance. No, he said. I want you to post all of it. Every second. The world needs to see exactly how people get treated when someone assumes no one important is watching. But I want to give you one more thing to go with it. Maya's eyes widened. An interview? A statement. He nodded at her camera. Roll it. She fumbled the lens cap off, hit record, and steadied her hands. Marcus looked directly into the lens. His lip was still swollen, a thin trail of dried blood at the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were fierce and clear. My name is Marcus Kane. Tonight I was assaulted because I didn't fit somebody's picture of what power is supposed to look like. But this isn't really about me. I can defend myself. I can buy the airline that let this happen to me. This is about every person who gets shoved aside, silenced, and dragged out of rooms they had every right to be in. People who don't have a boardroom behind them to make it right. Tonight, Meridian Airways didn't just fail a billionaire. It failed a human being. And I intend to make sure it never happens to anyone else on one of their planes again. He nodded once. Cut. That, Maya breathed, staring at her screen, is going to break the internet. Good. Let it break. Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes. We land in 3 hours. By the time we touch down, I want that clip on every feed from coast to coast. Maya scrambled back to her seat, connecting to the in-flight Wi-Fi with trembling hands. Marcus sat with his eyes shut, jaw throbbing, ribs aching, but his mind sharp as a blade. He had the crew. He had the narrative. There was only one loose end left dangling. Preston Kessler. Los Angeles was clear and cool when Flight 277 finally touched down, gliding to a remote stand far from the regular gates to avoid the press already swarming the terminal. As the plane rolled to a stop, Marcus caught the flash of red and blue lights outside his window. 3 black SUVs and 2 police cruisers, waiting on the tarmac like a firing squad. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Nobody moved. The cabin door opened. But instead of releasing passengers, 3 people in dark suits walked on, led by a woman in severe glasses carrying a tablet. Meridian's regional legal counsel. She walked straight into the cockpit and emerged a moment later with Captain Dawson, hat off, shoulders slumped, stripped of every ounce of authority he'd carried onto that flight. Then she walked to the galley. "Diane Colby?" Diane nodded, tears streaking down her face. "Please gather your personal belongings and surrender your crew badge. You are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation." Diane looked toward row 2 one last time as she was escorted off. Marcus didn't look back. He was already gathering his bag. "Ladies and gentlemen," the attorney announced to the stunned cabin, "we sincerely apologize for tonight's disruption. Private ground transportation has been arranged to bypass the press. Please accept this as a token of our regret." Marcus stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked off the aircraft, down the stairs, onto the tarmac where a black Mercedes was already idling for him. "Mr. Kane, Mr. Higgins is on the line for you." He slid into the back seat and took the phone. "Marcus." Walter Higgins's voice was hoarse, wrecked. "I've seen the video. It's past 15 million views. Every network's running it. Stock's down another 9% in pre-market. Tell me we can still fix this." "We can," Marcus said, cool and even. "I'm heading to the Wilshire Grand. I'm closing the Kessler deal, on my terms. And Walter, I want a press release out within the hour. Meridian is launching a zero-tolerance passenger treatment overhaul, run by an independent oversight board. And I'm naming the chair myself." "Who?" "Me." He hung up before Walter could argue. At the Wilshire Grand, the conference room was all dark wood and crystal water pitchers, and it was packed with Kessler Dynamics executives who looked like they hadn't slept. They'd heard rumors. The chair at the head of the table sat empty. The doors burst open. Preston stumbled in, wrinkled, wild-eyed, hair a mess. clearly having barely made it onto a commercial economy seat, and sprinted through the terminal. "I'm here," he gasped, dropping his briefcase on the table. "Sorry, the flight situation was a nightmare." He froze. At the far end of the table, calmly stirring a cup of coffee, sat Marcus Kane. The room went utterly silent. "You," Preston breathed. "What are you doing here?" An older board member with silver hair, Arthur Weiss, Kessler's chairman, cleared his throat. "Preston, sit down." "Mr. Kane is the managing partner of Ashford Capital, the firm we're here to court." Preston's eyes swung from Arthur to Marcus and back, and the color drained out of his face as the full weight of the truth crashed down on him. "No," he whispered. "No, you were in a hoodie." "Sit down, Preston," Marcus said, quietly. Preston collapsed into a chair, suddenly looking half the size he had 12 hours earlier. "Gentlemen," Marcus addressed the board, ignoring Preston entirely, "I've reviewed your financials. Kessler Dynamics has strong fundamentals, real technology, real value. What it has is a leadership problem." He slid a tablet across the mahogany table. On it, frozen mid-frame, was Maya's video. Preston, glass raised, mocking Marcus as he was dragged down the aisle. "This is your executive vice president," Marcus said, mocking a passenger, abusing airline staff, encouraging discrimination in real time. "This clip has been viewed by more people today than your last 3 annual reports combined. If I sign a rescue deal with him still on this board, my investors walk, and your customers boycott every product you make." Arthur watched the video in silence, his expression darkening with every second. He looked up at Preston. "Is this true?" It's taken completely out of context," Preston sputtered. "He provoked me. He stole my seat." "It was his seat, Preston," Marcus said. "And now I'm taking yours." He leaned forward, voice level, unhurried, final. "Here's my offer. Ashford provides the full $410 million injection. We save the company. We save all 5,200 jobs on your payroll. One condition." "Name it," Arthur said instantly. "Preston Kessler is removed, effective immediately. No severance, no golden parachute, no board seat, ever again, at any company Ashford has any stake in." "Done," Arthur said, without a flicker of hesitation. "What?" Preston shot to his feet, chair clattering backward. "You can't do this. My father built this company." "You're destroying it." "Your father built a company," Arthur snapped, "and you nearly burned it to the ground in one flight. Security. Escort Mr. Kessler out." 2 hotel security guards stepped forward, boxing Preston in from either side, an almost poetic mirror of the aircraft aisle 12 hours earlier. "Don't touch me," Preston screamed as they took hold of his arms. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "We know exactly who you are," Marcus said, voice cutting cleanly through the noise. "You're a liability." As they dragged Preston toward the doors, kicking, screaming, his eyes locked with Marcus's one final time. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply gave a single nod, a gesture of finality, nothing more. The doors closed. The screaming faded down the hallway and disappeared. Marcus turned back to the stunned board, opened his folder, and uncapped his pen. "Now," he said, "let's talk about the future." The deal was signed before the sun had fully risen over the coast. By the time the press release hit the wires, the real story wasn't the merger between Ashford Capital and Kessler Dynamics. The real story was the video. It had crossed 60 million views inside 2 days, jumping from platform to platform like wildfire jumping ridgelines. The internet did what the internet does best. It dug up everything. Within 72 hours, the fallout was catastrophic for everyone who'd chosen cruelty that night, and it was total vindication for the one man who hadn't. Preston didn't just lose his job, he lost the only identity he'd ever built, the myth of the untouchable golden sun. The clip of him toasting champagne while a man was dragged past him became the defining image of corporate arrogance that year. Replayed on every late-night show, dissected in every business school ethics class from that semester forward. Kessler Dynamics' stock dipped briefly on the news, then rocketed to a new high the moment his ouster was confirmed. The board didn't stop at firing him. They sued him personally for breach of fiduciary duty, citing the reputational damage he'd single-handedly caused. His assets were frozen pending litigation. The lease on his Malibu house was terminated inside a month. He tried twice to land an executive role at rival firms. Both times, he was laughed out of the interview before he'd finished his opening pitch. Every major airline in the country quietly revoked his elite status, not just Meridian. He was, in every sense of the word, groundado. 6 weeks later, a paparazzi photographer caught a grainy shot of him standing in line at a check-cashing counter, arguing about a fee, looking 20 years older than he had on that plane. Diane didn't just lose her job. She lost her pension. The internal investigation confirmed what Marcus's file review had already flagged. A documented pattern of escalating minor incidents into security matters, specifically when the passenger in question was a person of color. Meridian terminated her with cause. She tried to sue for wrongful termination. Her own union declined to back her once they'd seen the footage frame by frame. She was last known to have moved out of state, working retail hours in a small town, far from any runway, far from the sky she'd once patrolled like she owned it. Captain Dawson took early retirement rather than face a formal FAA inquiry that would have stripped his license in public. He kept his pension. He did not keep his reputation. Among a tight-knit community of pilots who all know each other's names, he became known, permanently, as the captain who let a passenger nearly sink an entire airline because he never once looked out the cockpit door. Officer Grant, the contract security guard who had physically slammed Marcus to the cabin floor, faced the harshest reckoning of all. Under mounting public pressure, the district attorney filed formal assault and battery charges. The footage left no room for interpretation. Excessive force deployed against a compliant, seated, seat-belted passenger. Grant was convicted, sentenced to jail time and a lengthy probation. He would never again hold a security or law enforcement license in any state. But the biggest transformation happened at Meridian itself. 6 months later, Marcus Kane walked into Meridian Airways headquarters, not as a passenger this time, but as the newly appointed chairman of the board of the restructured Meridian Ashford Group. The lobby was quiet as he entered. A young receptionist looked up and gave him a genuine smile, the kind that actually reaches the eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Kane." "Good morning, Alicia." He knew her name. He made a point now of knowing everyone's. He rode the elevator to the top floor. The boardroom was already assembled. Walter Higgins, seated humbly off to the side, and a new board around the table, younger, more diverse, focused on something Meridian had apparently forgotten it was supposed to care about: the people flying its planes. "Let's call this meeting to order," Marcus said, taking the seat at the head of the table. First item, the Open Sky Initiative. Report. The new VP of Operations stood. "Sir, since the new training protocols went live and we eliminated the subjective threat clause from the removal policy entirely, customer satisfaction is up 41%. Discrimination-related complaints are down 96%. Stock is at an all-time high." Marcus nodded slowly. "Good. Profitable and ethical were never supposed to be opposites. We just needed people willing to prove it." He looked out the window at the tarmac, watching aircraft lift off one after another into a clear afternoon sky, and let himself think, just for a moment, about that night, the humiliation, the blood on the carpet, the feeling of being handled like cargo. He hadn't just turned that pain into leverage. He'd forced an entire industry to look itself in the mirror and actually flinch. Later that day, Marcus had a flight of his own to catch, back to Chicago, to check in on a new expansion of the firm. He walked through the terminal, wearing a hoodie again. High-end cashmere this time, but a hoodie all the same. Jeans. Sneakers. He walked up to the gate for his flight, The agent glanced at his ticket, then at him. No sneer. No suspicion. No judgment at all, Mr. Kane, she said warmly. Welcome back. We've got you all set seat 2A. Actually, Marcus said, glancing down the long line of weary travelers waiting to board coach. Near the back stood a young man in an army uniform, exhausted, a heavy duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Give my seat to him. Upgrade him to 2A. The agent blinked. Sir, then where would you like to sit? Marcus smiled, small and genuine. Put me in the back. I like the view from there, reminds me where I came from. She smiled and nodded. Yes, sir. He walked down the jet bridge. When he stepped onto the aircraft, the crew straightened up instinctively. They knew exactly who he was, but there was no fear in it anymore. Only respect, the kind earned rather than demanded. He passed through first class and saw the young soldier settling into seat 2A, eyes wide with something like disbelief, as a flight attendant handed him a glass of champagne. The soldier caught Marcus's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Marcus gave him a small salute and kept walking, all the way to the back of the plane. Row 38. The seats were narrower. The air was a little stuffier. But as Marcus Kane sat down, buckled his belt, and settled in among students and tired parents and everyday people heading home, he felt something steadier and more powerful than anything he'd ever felt in a boardroom. He put his headphones in, closed his eyes. The engines roared. The plane lifted into the clouds, and Marcus Kane finally slept, the deep, untroubled sleep of a man who had made things right. Karma didn't just settle the score that night. It cleared an entire runway towards something better. Preston Kessler and the crew of Flight 217 thought they were removing an inconvenience. What they didn't understand, until it was far too late, was that they were putting their hands on the exact man who held every one of their futures in his palm. It's a reminder worth holding on to. Real power rarely raises its voice. It doesn't need a suit to prove itself, and it definitely doesn't need to see itself in a mirror before it deserves respect. Respect is a currency. Spend it wisely, and it carries you further than money ever could. Bankrupt it the way Preston did, on the assumption that another human being's worth can be measured by their clothes, or their silence, or the color of their skin. And eventually, the crash comes for everyone who chose to look the other way. So here's the question worth sitting with. If you'd been in that cabin that night, would you have stood up like Maya did? Camera shaking, voice cracking, but standing anyway. Or would you have looked down at your phone like everyone else and told yourself it wasn't your problem? Because the truth this story leaves behind is simple, and it doesn't need $1 billion to be true for every single one of us. Be kind to the people around you, every time, without exception, because you never really know who you're sitting next to.